The airport was bustling with travelers rushing to catch their flights, announcements echoing over the intercom, and the occasional sound of suitcase wheels rolling across the tile floor. Michael Carter, a well-dressed black man in his early 50s, walked confidently through the terminal. He had just finished a week of high-level business meetings overseas and was eager to get home. Despite his calm and collected demeanor, Michael was exhausted. His tailored navy blue suit and polished shoes gave him the appearance of a high-profile executive, which, in fact, he was. Michael was the CEO of Airline Airlines, one of the biggest commercial airlines in the country. But today, he wasn't flying in his usual private jet. He wanted to personally experience the service his airline provided to everyday passengers. As he approached the boarding gate for his first-class flight, he saw an elderly woman in a wheelchair struggling to communicate with a flight attendant. She was frail, her hands trembling as she tried to explain her situation. "Ma'am, you'll have to wait. We're assisting other passengers," the young flight attendant said dismissively, barely glancing at her. Michael's eyebrows furrowed. He didn't like seeing customers treated poorly, regardless of who they were. Stepping forward, he spoke gently to the elderly woman. "Ma'am, do you need assistance? I'd be happy to help." Before she could respond, the flight attendant, a blonde woman in her early 30s named Claire, turned to Michael with an unimpressed expression. She scanned him up and down, her gaze lingering disapprovingly. "I'm sorry, sir, but you'll have to wait your turn," she said curtly. Michael was taken aback. He wasn't expecting VIP treatment, but the dismissiveness in her tone was unmistakable. Before he could say another word, Claire turned her back on him, motioning for other passengers to board. Michael exhaled, realizing this situation was about to reveal more than just bad customer service. Michael took a deep breath, watching as passengers walked past him and onto the plane. He wasn't in a rush, but the way Claire had dismissed him didn't sit right. It wasn't just impatience, it was something else. The elderly woman beside him sighed, struggling to adjust her bag on her lap. "They used to be kinder," she murmured. Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "I'll make sure you get the help you need." Just then, Claire turned back to him, her eyes narrowing. "Sir, first-class boarding is for premium passengers only," she said, crossing her arms. Michael raised an eyebrow. She assumed he wasn't flying first class. He wasn't surprised, but he was disappointed. "I know," he replied calmly. "I have a first-class ticket." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. Claire barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "That's nice, but I still need you to step aside." Michael's jaw tightened. There was no reason for her to single him out like this. Other first-class passengers, mostly white, were being allowed to board without question. Another flight attendant, a young man named Jake, noticed the exchange. He frowned but remained silent. He had seen Claire's behavior before, but speaking up against a senior colleague wasn't easy. Michael held his ground. "I'd also like to help this woman get to her seat." "She seems to need assistance," Claire scoffed. "Sir, we have procedures. If she needs help, she can request it. You don't get special treatment just because you feel like playing hero." Michael took a deep breath, his patience thinning. He had spent years building Airline Airlines into one of the best in the industry, emphasizing customer service, respect, and inclusivity. And now, standing before him was an employee who embodied the exact opposite of his company's values. A few other passengers began to notice the standoff. Some murmured among themselves. Others simply looked away. Michael's eyes stayed locked on Claire's. He could have told her who he was right then and there, but he wasn't ready to do that just yet. He wanted to see how far she would take this. Michael remained calm, but inside, he felt the weight of the moment. He had dealt with discrimination before, but seeing it in his own airline, right at the boarding gate, was frustrating. The elderly woman beside him, Mrs. Whitmore, cleared her throat. "Young lady, this gentleman was only trying to help. What's the harm in that?" Claire's lips thinned. "Ma'am, we have specific protocols. If you need help, I can call for a wheelchair." Mrs. Whitmore shook her head. "I don't need a wheelchair, just a little assistance." And this nice man offered to help. She patted Michael's arm. Why are you treating him like this? Other passengers started whispering. A man in a business suit frowned, watching the exchange. A younger woman pulled out her phone, subtly recording. Claire let out an exasperated sigh. Look, sir, I need you to move so we can continue the boarding process. Michael crossed his arms. And if I don't? Claire scoffed. Then I'll have to call security. You're holding up the line. Jake, the younger flight attendant, hesitated before stepping forward. Claire, maybe we should just let him board. He has a first-class ticket. Claire shot him a sharp glare. I don't need you telling me how to do my job. Michael exhaled slowly. He had given her multiple chances to correct her behavior, but she just kept digging herself deeper. At that moment, a man in an airline uniform walked toward them, the gate supervisor, Mark Reynolds. His expression was a mix of curiosity and concern. What's going on here? Mark asked. Claire straightened up, as if she finally had someone to back her up. This man is refusing to step aside. He's causing a disturbance. Mark turned to Michael, then glanced at the murmuring passengers. Something wasn't adding up. Michael smiled slightly. Is that what you think is happening? Mark studied him for a second, then his eyes widened in recognition. He knew exactly who Michael was. Claire, however, was still completely unaware. Michael could see the gears turning in Mark's head. Would he expose the truth now, or let Claire continue to bury herself? Either way, the situation was about to take a dramatic turn. Mark Reynolds took a careful step forward, his brow furrowed as he studied Michael. His mind was racing. Why would the CEO of the airline be standing here, calmly allowing himself to be disrespected by a flight attendant? Sir, Mark said cautiously, is everything all right here? Michael gave a polite but knowing smile. I was just helping this kind lady to her seat, but it seems your flight attendant here has a problem with that. Claire crossed her arms. I already told him, he can't just board the plane whenever he wants. There are rules. Mark hesitated. Claire's tone was dripping with arrogance, but she had no idea she was talking to the most powerful man in the airline. Passengers were watching closely now. The woman with her phone continued recording, and whispers spread among the crowd. Mark turned to Claire. Did you check his ticket? Claire scoffed. Of course not. He just barged through trying to act like he owns the place. Michael let out a quiet chuckle. Oh, the irony. Mark took a slow breath, then turned back to Michael. Sir, may I see your boarding pass? Michael reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a first-class ticket. He held it up for everyone to see. Is this good enough? Claire's smirk faltered for the first time. She snatched the ticket, eyes scanning it quickly. Then she noticed something, the name. Michael Grant. Her face lost color. Wait, this says Michael Grant? Mark took the ticket from her and sighed. Claire, do you know who this is? Claire's confidence wavered. I don't care who he is. He still can't just break the rules. Michael raised an eyebrow. Break the rules? Or did you assume I didn't belong in first class? Mark's jaw tightened. He turned to Claire. Michael Grant isn't just any passenger. He's the CEO of this airline. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The man in the business suit whispered, no way. The woman recording let out a quiet, oh, this is about to get good. Claire's mouth opened slightly, her posture suddenly stiff. No, that can't be true. Michael slipped his ID out and held it up. His name, his face, his title, all confirmed. Claire's stomach dropped. She had just disrespected the CEO of the airline she worked for. Mark shook his head, disappointed. Claire, I think we need to talk now. Claire swallowed hard. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a disaster. Claire's face burned with embarrassment as she stared at Michael's ID. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, and the recording woman zoomed in on Claire's shocked expression. Mark let out a sigh, rubbing his temples. Claire, do you realize what you've done? Claire stammered, her hands gripping the boarding pass as if trying to find some excuse to save herself. I was just following protocol. He didn't announce who he was. How was I supposed to know? Michael folded his arms, his gaze steady but unreadable. So, you needed my title to treat me with respect? Claire opened her mouth, then shut it. The weight of those words hit her like a ton of bricks. Mark turned to Michael, his expression apologetic. Mr. Grant, I am so sorry about this. This is not how we treat passengers, especially not our CEO. Michael's lips twitched into a small, ironic smile. No, I imagine it's not. But it does make me wonder, how often does this happen to passengers who don't have a title to protect them? Silence. A few heads turned toward Claire, who was shifting uncomfortably. The business traveler in first class nodded in agreement. The woman recording whispered, "Oh, he's got a point." Claire's fingers trembled as she held on to the ticket. I didn't mean anything by it. Michael interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Tell me, Claire. If I was wearing a different suit, if my name wasn't on this ticket, would you have let me through without a problem? Claire hesitated. She knew the answer, and from the expressions around her, everyone else did too. Mark exhaled sharply. Claire, you need to step aside. Right now. Claire's mouth quivered. Wait, please, I was just trying to do my job. Michael gave her a long, measured look. You weren't doing your job, Claire. You were making a judgment. Mark gestured toward the terminal door. Go. We'll discuss this later. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes as she turned stiffly, walking toward the jet bridge. The passengers watched, some shaking their heads, others murmuring among themselves. Michael turned back to Mark. I'd like to make sure this never happens again. Mark nodded. Understood, sir. Completely understood. As Claire disappeared through the door, Michael took a slow breath. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever been denied a seat at the table, or a seat on a plane, because someone else assumed they didn't belong, and he wasn't about to let that continue. The tension in the boarding area lingered as Claire disappeared beyond the jet bridge. Michael could feel the weight of every eye on him, some apologetic, some expectant. The woman who had been recording stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Grant, she said hesitantly. Would you like me to send you this footage? I think people need to see what just happened. Michael considered it for a moment, then shook his head. Not yet. I have a different way of handling this. Mark cleared his throat. Mr. Grant, if there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know. Michael nodded. First, let's ensure the rest of our passengers board without further issue. Mark sprang into action, calling out over the speaker, Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the delay. Please proceed with boarding immediately. Passengers filed in, casting lingering glances at Michael as they passed. Some murmured quiet encouragement. You handled that well, an older woman whispered as she walked by. Michael boarded last, stepping into the first-class cabin. Mark followed him inside, his nervous energy evident. Sir, I assure you, Claire's actions do not reflect the values of this airline. Michael leaned back in his seat, fixing Mark with a measured gaze. Then why do incidents like this keep happening? Mark swallowed hard. Michael raised a hand. Don't answer. Not yet. I don't want empty apologies, Mark. I want action. Mark nodded eagerly. Understood, sir. I'll arrange for diversity training, review protocols. Michael cut him off. Not just training. Real change. A complete evaluation of how passengers are treated, from check-in to landing. And I want direct reports on it. Mark's face paled slightly, but he nodded. Of course, Mr. Grant. I'll get started immediately. Michael's tone softened slightly. I believe in second chances, Mark. But they have to be earned. Mark exhaled in relief. Absolutely, sir. I won't let this slide. As the plane taxied down the runway, Michael gazed out the window, his mind already forming the next steps. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about an industry, a culture. And he was in the perfect position to change it. As the plane soared into the sky, Michael leaned back in his seat, but his mind remained restless. The hum of the engines and the occasional clatter of drink service did little to quiet his thoughts. Change was overdue, and he had the power to make it happen. A soft knock at the divider interrupted his thoughts. It was Mark, looking hesitant but determined. "Mr. Grant, may I have a moment?" Michael gestured for him to sit. The airline manager took a deep breath before speaking. "Sir, I've already sent an internal report about what happened. Claire has been removed from this flight, and HR will be reviewing her conduct." Michael studied him. "That's a start. But I want more than reactionary measures. How often do passengers of color experience this kind of treatment before anyone intervenes?" Mark nodded, his face troubled. "Too often, sir. And it's not just our airline. The industry as a whole," he trailed off, knowing Michael was well aware of the problem. Michael's voice was firm. "Then let's be the ones to set the standard." Mark sat straighter. "I agree. I'll put together a team to review our boarding policies, bias training, and customer service standards. I'll personally oversee it if necessary." Michael gave a small nod of approval. "I expect a full report on my desk by next week." "And Mark looked up, if I find out this issue was ignored before today, there will be more than just retraining happening." Mark swallowed hard. "Understood, sir." Michael leaned back as Mark left. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly beneath them. He took a deep breath, letting the tension ease. This flight started with an injustice. But by the time they landed, real change would be set in motion. As the plane cruised at high altitude, the first-class cabin remained quiet. Passengers enjoyed their meals, the occasional clink of glasses filling the space. But Michael's mind was elsewhere, running through plans to overhaul the airline's customer service training. Then, a hesitant voice broke his thoughts. "Excuse me, Mr. Grant?" Michael turned. It was Claire, the flight attendant who had denied him boarding assistance. She looked nervous, her hands clasped in front of her. I just wanted to apologize," she said, her voice lacking the usual confidence of a flight attendant. "I didn't know who you were." "If I had known," Michael's expression darkened. "If you had known what?" "That I was the CEO?" Claire's face turned pale. I didn't mean it like that, sir." Michael sighed, shaking his head. "That's the problem, Claire. You think my status is what matters. Would you have treated any other black passenger the same way if they weren't a CEO?" She opened her mouth but had no answer. Michael continued, his voice calm but firm. "You judged me the moment you saw me, you assumed I wasn't important enough to help. And I guarantee this wasn't the first time you've treated someone unfairly." Claire swallowed hard. I never meant to discriminate against anyone." Michael met her gaze. "Intentions don't matter as much as actions. And today, your actions spoke volumes." Silence stretched between them. Claire's hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. "I understand." "Good," Michael said. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Claire walked away, her head lowered. For the first time, she realized that an apology wasn't enough. Change was the only thing that truly mattered. The flight continued smoothly, but Claire couldn't shake the conversation she had with Michael. She had been trained to handle difficult situations, to maintain professionalism, but nothing had prepared her for this. She wasn't just dealing with an angry passenger, she was facing the consequences of her own biases. Meanwhile, Michael remained composed, but inside, he was thinking about the bigger picture. He had worked his entire life to reach this position, breaking barriers in an industry where black executives were rare. But moments like these reminded him of the struggles that still existed. Just then, a senior flight attendant, an older woman named Patricia, approached him with a warm smile. "Mr. Grant, I just wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier," she said. "I've been with this airline for over 20 years, and I can tell you, this is not the culture we want to promote." Michael appreciated her words but remained firm. "Then it needs to change. Incidents like this shouldn't happen at all." Patricia nodded. "I agree. We need better training, better awareness." Michael leaned forward. "Not just awareness. We need accountability. Because if we don't address these issues, they'll keep happening." Claire, standing a few feet away, overheard the conversation. A lump formed in her throat. She had always seen her job as just that, a job. But now, she realized it was much more than that. Michael's presence wasn't just about status or power. It was about leadership, the kind that didn't just demand change but inspired it. As the plane began its descent, Claire took a deep breath. For the first time, she wasn't just hearing words about fairness and equality, she was truly listening. As the plane touched down, Claire's heart pounded. The reality of what had happened hit her harder than ever. She had disrespected a man who not only deserved better but had the power to change the very industry she worked in. Michael stood up from his seat, adjusting his suit. He was calm, but there was an unmistakable authority in his demeanor. Passengers around him whispered, now fully aware of who he was. Some cast disapproving glances at Claire, while others nodded at Michael in respect. As he stepped into the jet bridge, the airline's regional manager was already waiting. A nervous smile spread across the manager's face as he extended his hand. "Mr. Grant, I want to sincerely apologize for..." Michael raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Save it. I've heard enough apologies. What I want is action." Claire, who had been trailing behind, felt her stomach tighten. She knew what was coming. Michael turned to her, his gaze firm but not unkind. "Claire, do you understand why what happened today was unacceptable?" She swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir. I judged you unfairly. I assumed things without knowing the truth. And I was wrong." Michael nodded. "Good. But an apology isn't enough. The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. This wasn't just about keeping her job anymore. It was about being better. "I'll do whatever it takes to learn. To change." Michael studied her for a moment before responding. "Then start by listening. Really listening. People shouldn't have to prove their worth to be treated with respect." The regional manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant, we'll be implementing additional training across all our teams to prevent this from happening again." Michael nodded. "Good. But let's not stop at training. Let's make this a company that leads by example." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Claire with a lesson she would never forget. Today, she didn't just meet an airline CEO, she met a leader. If you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter their appearance, share this story. Let's stand against discrimination and treat everyone with kindness. What would you have done in this situation? Comment below.